Hey up. The American presidential election is almost upon us. And it occurred to me that there are an awful lot of British people who don't understand how the Americans choose their presidents. Here's a clue: it's not the popular vote. 8 years ago, Donald Trump got about 2 million votes less than Hillary Clinton and still won the presidency. So forget the popular vote, it doesn't count, it's the electoral vote. So that begs two questions. What is the electoral vote? And how does it work? And why do they use it? Now the how is the easy bit. The why is a bit more complicated. So let me deal with the how first of all, how it works. Basically, each state has a congressional representation. Each state has two senators. No matter how big the state is, no matter how small, it has two senators. Based upon its population, it has congressmen or representatives. Now, big states, in terms of population, like California, get a lot of representatives. I think California has over 50. Texas has about 14. New York has, I think, 28. That includes senators as well. Then you have states like North Dakota and South Dakota, massive in terms of land area, tiny in terms of population. So North and South Dakota get two senators, and each one just has one representative. What's this got to do with electing the president? The number of representatives you have in Washington is the same as the number of electors that you have for the presidency. So a state that has three representatives, two senators, and a congressman will get 3 votes in the Electoral College. A state like New York with 28 will get 28 votes. Okay, so how are these electors chosen? In 48 out of the 50 states, it's winner take all. Basically, you go along and vote, and your ballot paper will say Trump or it will say Harris. You put your mark next to Trump or Harris, but you're not voting directly for them, you're voting for the electors who will elect them. And if enough of you vote for, say, Trump, 51% in a state vote for Trump, then Donald Trump wins all those electoral votes in that state. There are 2 exceptions to this, Nebraska and Maine, where they split the electoral vote. Basically, what happens is you vote in your congressional district. If you win 51% in the congressional district, you get the vote. And then at the end of the day, all the votes are added up. And whoever has the highest number of votes statewide gets the extra 2 votes that represent the senators. So that's how it works. It is, in that sense, very simple. It relies on electors who are pledged to vote for a particular candidate, keeping their promises. There have been what were known as faithless electors in American history, but none of them have affected the outcome of the election. It's really just a pose. So, what you need to remember on the 5th of November is the number 270. Because whoever gets 270 votes has won a majority in the Electoral College and will become the President of the United States. So it doesn't matter what the popular vote is, you can forget all that. I think you can forget opinion surveys as well because they're based on the popular vote. All you need to remember, 270 electoral votes. The person who gets 270 gets the White House. End of story. Now then, why on earth did the Americans choose this convoluted system? And it was even more convoluted in the 18th century. For about 13 years, from 1776 to 1788, the country was governed by Articles of Confederation. Congress was a unicameral body, and all states had one vote. You could have more delegates to the Congress if you wanted, but the state got one vote. There was no real executive. So when Congress was out of session, it was very difficult doing things. So they decided to set up a meeting in Philadelphia to redraw the Articles of Confederation. And politicians being politicians, they drew up a constitution instead. Now, if you read the Constitution, you can see it is a work of compromise. The little states did not want to give up their control over the Congress. So the compromise there was that each state, no matter how small, would have 2 senators. That allowed the small states to vote for the principle that in the House of Representatives, population would decide the number of representatives. The Senate was not elected, it was appointed. It was appointed by the governors of the states with the consent of the state legislatures. 1913, they changed the Constitution and the Senate became directly elected. But until then, it was basically an appointed body. House of Representatives, the nearest thing they had to democracy, but it was a very restricted franchise. Franchise in 1780s was based on property holdings. Now, let's be honest, it wasn't difficult in America to get land to farm. And if you owned a farm, you got the vote. People in the cities who were artisans had the vote on the basis of their tax roll. So, more people in America had the vote than in England. Nevertheless, it was a restricted franchise. And of course, it excluded slaves, who by definition did not have the vote as they were property. It excluded landless farm labourers, since they owned nothing. And of course, it excluded women. Funnily enough, it included those free blacks who owned property. Strange situation they had in America, that in the early years of the Constitution, free blacks who met the property qualification could vote. That changed in the 1820s when America moved on to white manhood suffrage. So all white men got the vote by the end of the 1820s, and pretty much all blacks were excluded from the franchise. How do we choose the president? Now, When it came to looking for an executive, they considered various options. They did consider a monarchy. That was quickly kicked in the head, but it was considered. Eventually, they came up with the idea of a chief executive, a president. So, how do you choose him? Now, obviously, they weren't going to choose him democratically. The men who met in Philadelphia were afraid of democracy. They equated democracy with mob rule. So democracy was out of the question. They considered having the president appointed by the Congress, but that would put the president under the Congress, in effect answerable to the Congress, and they didn't want that. They wanted the president to be the equal of Congress. So how do you choose the president? Well, you go back to the states. You say the people who have the vote in each state probably don't know very much about national politics, but they do know who their local leaders are. And the local leaders are the men they trust. So we can have a situation where people are voting for the local leaders who then meet up in an electoral college and decide which of these candidates they will vote for the presidency. If they thought about it at all, they seem to have thought that the best man would be president and the second best man would be vice president. They were not in favour, aside from not being in favour of democracy, they were not in favour of political parties either. Political parties were seen as divisive. They were seen as disruptive. So the notion that you would elect a president via a political party was something that frightened them almost as much as democracy frightened them, which is why in the Constitution you will find no reference to political parties at all. The Founding Fathers were afraid of them. So, the situation has changed over the decades since 1788, but by and large it's the same. Now everybody has the vote. Well, most people do. Some states still restrict the franchise. If you're convicted of a felony, you can't vote. But by and large, everybody has the vote, male and female over the age of 18. And everybody can go and vote for Mr. Trump, or what's her name, the cackling woman, and they can have their choice. But they're not voting for that choice directly, they're voting for a slate of electors. So remember, on the 5th of November, it's the first one to get to 270 electoral votes wins the election. Enjoy yourself. Think on.